The French poet Théophile Gautier once said, "To love is to admire with the heart, to admire is to love with the mind." I both loved and admired Dennis Smith. When I talked to Peyton this week, I told Peyton, I said, it's hard to lose a hero at any age. But not at all talking about Peyton losing a hero. I was talking about myself losing someone who I idolized like Dennis. Dennis, such a forward thinker, disguised in overalls. And if you just judged a book by its cover, you would have missed the brilliant mind, the compassionate heart, and the caring soul that Dennis really was. He thought with the precision of an engineer, the creativity of an architect, and the skill to put both of those things into practice. I've made a living working with computers. My dad bought me my first computer in the early 80s because he thought that was something that might catch on in the future. So you can imagine my shock and glee when I found out that Dennis Smith was one of the first people in Corning to not only have, but to use and to utilize a computer. Dennis was at the Corning Bank in the mid to late 70s when they brought computers in for the first time. And so he was the guy responsible for the system there and working with the programmers out of New York to make them run. And when I'm sure my mouth gaped open when I heard Dennis talk to me about DOS programming. It was just something I wasn't expecting. And so Dennis, being the original IT guy in Corning, was always a thrill for me. So fast forward to the early 2000s, maybe mid 2000s. I was one of the first in the area to bring to PowerPoint into the worship service to help people see the scriptures as we read them and to help show pictures that would go along with the message that I was presenting. And I never will forget the first Sunday that I did this. Dennis was the first one to come to me after services, and he said, I don't know what this cost, but he said, I'll give $500 towards getting that in this church. We need that. And so, still, such a forward thinker his whole life, and still showing that all the way through. Last year, just last year, I went to Dennis to learn how to sharpen my pocket knife. I was carrying this old pocket knife I had found a year or two back, and I thought, I really don't know the proper way to put an edge on one. And yes, I could have got on YouTube and found out how to sharpen one in just a matter of minutes. But no, I knew a guy who would be thrilled to show me, and at the same time, I could get to visit with him and hear some of his stories. And so I went to Dennis's, and he showed me the proper way to sharpen that pocket knife, and I got to listen to him tell stories and got to look at all of his knife collection and spend that time with him. And again, just a wonderful man and a wonderful man to be around. Now, I'll tell you a story you probably don't know about Dennis, or maybe have never heard. One time I preached a story on, or a message on grace at Success. And Dennis came to me after services, and I could tell by the look in his eye when he walked up to me that he had something to say. And so he told me a story. And as he told me this story, the tears welled up in his eyes, his voice cracked, and that just made me well up with tears to see him with that much emotion and passion to tell this story. And I never will forget it. It's always been a very important story to me, and this is it. Dennis said he remembered as a little boy going to church, and the preacher laid a bill on the table one day. And he invited anybody to come up and to take that bill. But Dennis said no one moved. No one made a motion to get up. So he announced again, he said, this dollar is for anyone who will come get it. It's yours to have. Just step out, come pick it up, and it's yours. Still no one moved. Church just sat still and silent. Dennis said he finally said, people, has this dollar got no value at all? Does it not hold some value? It is free and available for anyone who will come and pick it up. Dennis said, I finally got my nerve up, and I got up and walked up there and picked that dollar up. And he said, then the preacher said, son, he said, you just learned a lesson about grace. He said, that dollar is completely yours now. You've just learned the simplest lesson about grace. You did not work for that dollar. You did nothing to earn that dollar, but it was freely given to you. To anyone it was available who would receive it, and you received it. He said, son, God has done the same thing for you with Jesus Christ. Grace is a gift that you don't deserve. You've done nothing to earn, and only a few will be brave enough to receive it. Dennis said, I've never forgot that lesson, and I'll never forget Dennis telling me that story. I want to end with a passage that always made me think about Dennis. As Paul wrote to the Philippian church, he gave them instructions on how to act. And a lot of it is always, to me, as I read through it, sounded a lot like he was describing Dennis Smith. Philippians 2, verse 3 and following, Paul says this. He says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interest, but each of you to the interest of others. In your relationship with one another, have the same mindset of Christ Jesus, who being in the very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant. God, your selfless servant, comes home to you now. I'll forever miss him, always remember him, and continually strive to be like him. God bless the family of Dennis Smith.